A huge, huge day in the news with Roe v. Wade done. It took 50 years, give or take, but here we are. We'll get into all of this. I'm solo today. Clay is tending to family matters. He may be joining us via phone at some point during the show. Depends on his obligations today. But this is Buck Sexton. I'm down in Florida currently, and I was watching live this morning as the massive Supreme Court decision came down. Arguably the biggest Supreme Court decision in my lifetime, certainly in the top 2 or 3, I would think. Massive decision, 6-3 here. 200-page opinion released by the court this morning. So I was reading it feverishly to get through as much as humanly possible before coming on air. So there's a couple of ways to look at this, and we're going to break down the legal aspect of it, the political implications, the possibility for civil unrest from Democrats, of course. As we know, they are, despite the one time they are fixated on a riot coming from their political opponents, the Democrats are the riot as normal political discourse party. That could happen. We'll certainly look at that. What does this mean for the midterm elections as well? Can Democrats capitalize on this decision as a means of mobilizing the Democrat base? There's so much going on here. There's so much to look at. But I would start with the very simple proposition here that life wins in this case. The Supreme Court decision has not made abortion illegal nationally, but it will result in, and I believe the state of Missouri has already, because it had some laws ready to go in case of this decision, it has effectively outlawed almost all abortions. But it does mean that there will be far more babies born. There will be far more children who grow up to be adults, people who have lives that they are able to lead, and parents who will have made the right decision and will know that in time, even if they were scared at first, even if it was unplanned, even if it was a surprise or an inconvenient time or any of those things. So there will be now millions of lives over the decades to come that will occur. I mean, it's not even to say that the lives are saved is true, but there also will be people who get to enjoy their full lives, get to enjoy the experience of life, and parents who will enjoy the experience of their children, of being parents as a result of this decision. Now, there will still be abortion in New York and California, and Colorado just recently passed a radical state-level abortion law. Abortion all 9 months of a pregnancy. But in this 6-3 decision, the critical change here is that both Roe and Casey were overruled. Both Roe and Casey were found to be bad law. Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Now, there's a lot of intricate legal analysis when you read this opinion, authored by Alito in the majority. When you read this opinion, you find yourself saying, it's stunning, honestly, at this point in time. It is stunning to look back and see how flimsy and dishonest and obtuse and just the whole Roe regime was built on lies. The legal analysis was preposterous. It can't even begin to hold up to rational scrutiny. It can't even begin to be looked at as a good faith argument. I mean, you can start with this proposition. The right to an abortion, according to Roe, came from a right to privacy, neither of which are actually mentioned in the Constitution, neither of which actually exist. And then the right to abortion that comes from a right to privacy was somehow tied to a bunch of different amendments. They weren't sure how many different amendments. They threw a bunch of numbers in there. And then later on, it was, well, it's actually a liberty right that comes from a due process right. I mean, this was This was not only, of course, violence to all the millions of preborn children who suffered as a result of this Roe regime. This was violence to the law. This was lunacy. It was astonishingly dishonest for the legal regime in this country to have upheld this as long as it did. It was astonishingly obtuse for Democrats to walk around with this certainty, this slogan, a constitutional right to an abortion. At the time of Roe, dozens of states outlawed abortion. There was a long history of abortion as illegal, and abortion was certainly not even a procedure that one could engage in at the time of the founding. So this was completely contrary to the rights, and this is all laid out in the opinion, the rights that you would find as a result of diving into our history, looking at our history, and what the implied and foundational rights are as a result of that history. So this was always bad law. We knew it. I said it. And I've been thinking, stretching back to last fall, that they would be willing to do this. It is a massive step in the right direction for the rule of law and also for decency and morality in this country. On so many levels, to demand that people not only accept that babies were being killed as a function of not only this massive abortion industry in so many of these Planned Parenthood and other facilities across the country. And we know that's what was going on. We know just based on the language they always use. Oh, it's about a freedom of a woman to control her destiny. No, it's, can you kill babies in the womb? That's actually the question. They can talk about all these other things, but the fundamental question was the protection of a life in the womb. And now the states can look at and determine, well, when does that life begin? And this is something that on the state-by-state basis, there will be different responses. But to make everyone in this country go through with this, it was almost a Soviet-level pretense. Yes, there's a constitutional right to an abortion. No one really thought that. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in our legal and constitutional history. The basis for this was a fabrication. And so in that sense, they were forcing us all to be complicit in a lie. And what do I always say? Borrow from the great Solzhenitsyn, speaking of anti-Soviets, live not by lies. Roe forced us all as a nation to live by lies for decades. And now, these different states that have these policies are going to have to justify what they're doing. They no longer have this catch-all. They no longer have this facade of it's a constitutional right. Shut up. Decided. It's over. Not anymore. Now what's the argument? Now who is going to want to be that state legislature that stands up in Colorado and says, a baby at 9 months in the womb is not a baby. Do anything you want to it. It's fine. It's legal. Who wants to make that barbarous argument now? I know there are a lot of very ardently pro-abortion legislators out there, Nancy Pelosi and others among them, who have been saying such things. But what you're going to see is now it becomes much more difficult. Now they have to actually engage with the substance. They have to engage with the merits of the argument. What is it then at 9 months? If it's not a baby, at 8 months, at 7 months, at 6 months, what is that little heartbeat? What are those tiny fingernails and eyes and the nose and the adorable little toes? What is all of that if it's not a baby? Now, Democrats are acting out with rage in a frenzy right now because for the first time in any of their, basically the first time in memory. I mean, some people may remember a pre-Roe era, but very few these days, comparatively. And for the first time, they're going to have to make the case that convenience overrides a right to life and that the state which has a fundamental, foundational responsibility to protect innocent life, should turn the other way as people continue to make this decision. This often just so barbarous. It's so clearly morally wrong. And yet here we are after how many decades of this? After how many decades of having to pretend that this made sense, to pretend that it was constitutional, and to pretend that there was some ethical understanding that we had all reached as a country. No, we had not. I want to say, and I'd be remiss if I did not say it, huge amount of gratitude should be given to those who have been working patiently, tirelessly in the pro-life movement, for those who have been convincing people, who have been providing assistance to mothers who are having a crisis pregnancy, who are having a difficult time with this in their lives, for those who worked in the legal circles and the legislature and the Federalist Society. There has been an army of righteousness that for decades has been fighting to get to this point. Now, it's not over. The army cannot disband, so to speak. Remember, an army of righteousness means one that is lawful and kind and loving and supportive of all lives and supportive of lives of the unborn, helping everyone who is having a difficult time with their pregnancy, helping their fellow Americans understand why this is such an important issue, and now taking it to the legislature. But the fight continues on, because now we'll see what states decide. There will be some states that protect life. There will be other states that decide they want to go as far as possible. And this is going to be a political issue. Now I think you're going to see a bit of hysteria from the Democrats about they want to ban contraception, they want to ban condoms, they want to ban... No, that's not what's going on right now. But they are very upset. And I would just leave you with this thought before we get into some of the politics of this in a moment. And I mean, the electoral, who's in power, who's calling the shots components here. There are a lot of people for whom today, and it will take time for this to sink in, but either through their own personal actions or their support of the abortion regime for decades, will slowly come around to realizing that the constitutional justification for this was always a falsehood. And then that leaves you only with your own conscience and your own morality. And it's going to be a whole lot harder for people. It's going to be very difficult on a lot of people in this country right now, I think, who have the ability to think critically and engage in some level of introspection over this. It's going to be painful when this finally seeps in, that this was not some constitutional right all along, and that something else, something very different was at work here. So it is a day that, as I've said, you can summarize with life wins, but the battle is not over. It is a great day for the legacy of the Trump administration. There's no question about it. It's a great day for the Supreme Court. They did not buckle to the obvious pressure campaign from the left to continue with this regime of infanticide. And it's a good day for the country because the rule of law is starting to, at least for a moment here, feel like it means something again. And it's not just the whim of dictatorial activist judges. It's not the demands of the mob out on the street or in front of the judges' homes. It's what is actually true. What is the law? What is right and what is good? So those are all things that come together today.
It's been issued by Justice Alito, and Roe v. Wade, according to our reports from the U.S. Supreme Court and our own Shannon Bream, is that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and the question of abortion has been returned to the states. It's been 50 years since that landmark Supreme Court ruling, and conservatives in government and in law have been working for 50.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. This is Buck in solo today. Clay dealing with some family obligations. And It's just a huge day, folks. I mean, you can't see it any other way. Roe v. Wade gone after 50 years. I have never lived in an America where I didn't have to contend with the reality of abortion in all 50 states and the pretense, the just complete nonsense of this as a constitutional right. Really? Based on what exactly? You go back and you read the initial arguments, and it's just unfathomable that anybody thought this made any sense. But they wanted it. And you see, the problem with the left is that whatever they want, that's what's constitutional. Whatever they want, that's what's legal. It is the emotions of the mob determining what is lawful, what the United States will be as a country. Well, not on this one. Not anymore. Joe Biden's supposed to address the country here in just a few minutes. I do not have high hopes for Mr. Magoo to unify us, that's for sure. I think he's going to just do the usual, because he's not a nice guy. One of the other media lies they always tell. Joe Biden's going to be addressing the nation here shortly. He tends to run very late. We'll take some of it live so you can hear it. You'll know everything that he has to say in the first 60 seconds or so. We'll maybe play him for a minute or two so you can hear where he's going with this. He's going to do his, I feel the country, and I'm here, and women, and, no joke. This is a rough day, and women, not a joke, folks. The women, the rights and the freedom, and it's going to be a real mess. But then he'll start to talk about, tyrannical, far-right judges, and he's going to get nasty on this one, is my prediction. He's not going to take a moment here to try to cool the passions out there on the street. Biden isn't about that. He is a total and utter fraud. This is a guy who pretends to be just about, the folks and sitting at the kitchen table and paying the bills and all this stuff. And then you see what he says about those actual folks, and it's whatever is going to make the blue-haired cat ladies who are shrieking in rage and indignation out in front of the steps of the Supreme Court. He says whatever's going to make them happy, because that's what will make CNN anchors happy, and that's what will make the New York Times editorial board happy, and that's actually what matters to Joe Biden. People that are working hard for a living, that don't live in the coast, that aren't part of the Democrat apparatus. Speaking of Biden, here he is, folks, addressing America. We won't listen for too long. Tune in.
Already recognized. They didn't limit it. They simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected women's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, a right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter that drew a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faith and backgrounds found acceptable, that had been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today. And it was a constitutional principle upheld by justices appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision written by a justice appointed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. In the 5 decades that followed Roe v. Wade, justices appointed by Republican presidents from Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, George W. Bush, were among the justices who voted to uphold the principles set forth in Roe v. Wade. It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view. The court has done what it has never done before, expressly take away a constitutional right that is so fundamental to so many Americans that had already been recognized. The court's decision to do so will have real and immediate consequences. State laws banning abortion are automatically taking effect today, jeopardizing the health of millions of women, some without exceptions. So extreme that women could be punished for protecting their health. So extreme that women and girls who are forced to bear their rapist's child, with the child a consequence. It just stuns me. So extreme that doctors will be criminalized for fulfilling their duty to care. Imagine having a young woman have to carry the child of incest as a consequence of incest. No option. Too often the case. The poor women are going to be hit the hardest. It's cruel. In fact, the court
honestly,
laid
I think
out
we can stop it there.
state laws
I can't
abortion.
take it. That was. I almost threw up on my own feet listening to this guy. That was appalling. You know what? I want to come back and just. There's so much. I was taking notes here with all of you as the president of the United States made an abject fool of himself, but he's a moron, so this is not surprising. Everything he said there was just either dishonest, flimsy, inflammatory, or stupid. No, there's so much here. Let's take a step back, crack our knuckles for a second here, take a deep breath. I'll come back and explain it. A woman's right to choose what, Joe? To choose what? An intensely personal decision. Is that a legal matter? Is that in the 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment or something? What exactly? The power to control their destiny. The fundamental right of privacy. Does someone have a fundamental right of privacy to abuse a child? Can you be abusive toward a child? Because, it's in the home. It's privacy. Of course not. You can protect the child in the home. Why can't you protect the child in the womb, Joe? He's the worst, folks. The absolute worst. I was expecting a bad speech, but that was appalling. He's not even making it interesting at a legal level. His legal analysis, Joe Biden does the legal analysis of a 3rd grader who can barely read. I mean, honestly, the fact that this guy allegedly has a law degree is appalling. But, a lot of dumb lawyers, unfortunately, running around voting Democrat. All right, we'll come back here in just a second. That we had to hear it because the president's addressing us on this one, but that was pollution for your ears. But we had to know what the regime says. Now we do. They're lying to you. If someone says, we really need to be able to have an appendectomy, you're going, heck yeah, you got an appendicitis, it could hurt you, and you could even die, you get a fever, That's health care. You don't say, well, there's a right to freedom from a vestigial organ becoming duly infected, and that's it. No, you just say, I appendicitis, got to get that, that inflamed appendix out. Or I think you can take intravenous antibiotics for it too. That's not the point. You see what I mean? You talk about the actual thing you're doing. Democrats Won't even talk about the thing. You know, if abortion makes them uncomfortable as a word, why? If it's just health care, I'll sit here all day and talk about, back pain, heart surgery, health care. It's not health care. We're not idiots. But they say it. Joe Biden says it. I mean, Joe Biden, honestly, folks. The state of Delaware, all these people that have been voting for Joe Biden for such a long time, it's for Senate, embarrassing. It's a really embarrassing thing for this country. Things he says also in that speech, upset the balance of our law. What does that mean? The balance of our law. You mean libs get their way made up out of whole cloth, nothing to do with the Constitution? That's the balance of a law? I don't think so. Extreme ideology? Half the country, give or take. And when you look at actually the regulations or the rules now in places like Colorado, with the governor there, Polis, passing an extremely far-reaching pro-abortion law. Any reason, no reason, all 9 months. American people oppose that by 70%, 80% margin. So, yeah, I don't think so.